Awesome. So everybody, welcome and thank you so much for joining us as we discuss the moderated Q&A app. I'm going to put a little blurb about this in our chat, and you'll see that come through in just a second. So the Q&A app is really interesting because to me, it's a really awesome answer to the question of how do you manage questions? Sometimes meetings can get pretty large and it could feel like, it's almost impossible to do by yourself. So this is a great alternative to, having a team of moderators standing by. And even if you do have that team of moderators, it's a great way to add that structure. All right, so before we kick off and get into the demo, I just want to have a little bit of a discussion. And what I'm going to do is turn over to the Q&A. So if you see at the top of your screen, you'll notice that there is a little icon that says Q&A. If you can all navigate there, you'll see that under Published, there's a list of questions that Walt and I actually prepared ahead of time. So we want to know two things. How do you manage Q&A in your meetings? And you could think outside the app. And also, have you used the moderated Q&A app before? All right, so is this something you're familiar with? Have you done it? Or is this all brand new? So I'll give you guys, let's give like 30 seconds or so. So if you could find those Q&As and answer them, that's a great way to kind of get hands-on and check this out. All right, so I'm just going to sit tight for a second. I'm going to be quiet here, give everybody a chance to answer some questions. All right, I see some new comments coming in. Awesome. So as the organizer and the presenter, what I see on my screen is a little icon, a little purple icon that says 5 new comments, 2 new comments. So it's kind of giving me a countdown. It doesn't actually display the answer until I click onto it and I could load it. So as I'm doing the presentation, it doesn't feel distracting at all. And we're going to get into that a little bit later and you'll see that live for yourself. But I see that we've got some best practices that are being shared. And it looks like we've got some people that are using it. Some people are brand new. You tried, but it was a little tough. Totally get it. Yep, totally get it. And I'm going to give you a thumbs up as I'm reading through it. It's new to you, so thank you so much, Terry, for hopping on. Tanya, not quite yet, but we're going to get you there. Awesome. I love it. So this is really helpful for me as a presenter to see where everyone is with the audience, as the audience, right? I can't see by a show of hands. I guess I could if you raised your hands with our Teams features, but this gives me a lot more insight into, okay, are we, where are we with it? It seems like the majority of the callers are pretty new at this. Some of you have tried it. And it seems like from the comments above that you've also tried some other funky workarounds. You constantly scanning the chat. You are working on a plan of how to manage it. I totally get it. Before we jump in, Walt, I know that you're an expert presenter. You have almost a decade of experience doing these presentations. How do you manage the Q&A? We could think outside the app, but I'd love, to just kind of hear some ways that you've done this in the past. I think it's a great way to start and kick off this conversation.
Sure, absolutely. Real quick, expert presenter. I love that. I got to start using that here.
Yeah, update the resume.
Moving forward. Exactly, right? So it's definitely more of an art than a science when it comes down to working with the Q&As coming through. The biggest thing I would really go ahead and consider is, first off, considering what topic are you actually presenting on or training on or whatever the case may be. Then the audience themselves, and this can be based off what roles are going to be coming through. Are you talking to people from HR? Are you talking to maybe inventory workers? Or are you talking to maybe C-suite individuals as well? It can vary quite a bit. And that might dictate also too their level of engagement. And that's just at a role level. You consider too the actual company culture. What does that piece look like? Some organizations, they simply have it within their culture piece where, hey, we want everyone to be engaged within all of our meetings. Some maybe not so much. And that's okay too. So something to go ahead and consider there. But that can help you dictate really how many people you might want to bring with you to assist to actually run the event to handle all those questions coming through, right? Yeah. Where maybe if you have a small attendee size of 20, 30 people like we have now, maybe one additional person is all you need. Very rarely would I ever say it's okay to go solo. Sometimes, okay, you can help field some of those questions if you just have something up on the chat or if you're just doing it in a pinch. But just from that actual attendee experience perspective, right? Having somebody there to assist you to handle all the questions coming through will definitely be very beneficial and make everything flow a lot smoother. And then also looking at it from the actual moderation perspective of being able to screen questions coming through in the Q&A, because we did get a question for somebody that asked about that. So thank you very much, Colin. Where you may very well have lots of questions coming through, and if you do have the moderating option enabled within the Q&A app, you do have to stay on top of, so you do have to be actively engaged within there, but picking and choosing too what questions you might want to actually publicize for everyone else in the group to actually read and see. Some questions are very appropriate where it is all tied to what's being discussed. Maybe there's a natural flow progression for what's being asked with them, and a lot of other people will benefit from that question because, hey, if one person's asking, there's going to be other people that want to know about it too, right? On the flip side of that, maybe it's a fantastic question that came through, but you don't want to publish it just because maybe that's going to throw everyone off.
Maybe it's sidetrack. Yeah.
Exactly. And it might just go over a lot of people's heads, very applicable for a certain core group of individuals. So that might be better as like a follow-up question, or maybe a separate announcement where you want to maybe give an FYI, hey, we've gotten some feedback based off one particular topic. I just wanted to address this, but save it towards the end for maybe a more strategic point in time.
Yeah, I think so too, especially when we're dealing with technology. You sometimes get those questions that are like more of a deep dive, or like you said, they could take you on a tangent. So it's a great way to evaluate what those questions are, and even assess like how many people are interested in this, or how many people need support there, and it could help you kind of really capture that information and start planning as you're moving to those next phases of your project. So I think, I mean, I'm totally aligned with the way you're explaining it, Walt. I think you're making a lot of good points about culture, about engagement, and about moderation. And I think that, my pro tip, I think we're on the same page. If you have a culture of engagement and you have a large meeting, it's very helpful to have people that can tag team with you. And I think this structure buttons it up very nicely. Instead of trying to use a few different solutions, I think it creates something more streamlined. And I'd love to show everybody. So with that being said, I'm going to pivot into the live demo. Any other questions before we hop in? Just click on the chat if we want to ask any questions there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just going back and forth right now to check on that one.
Yeah. I don't see any questions coming through. So I'm actually going to shut off my camera for a sec because I have a lot of windows on my side. You're still going to hear my voice, and we are going to switch gears, and I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to bring you into a live demo. So for the sake of the demo, I am playing the role of Miriam, and I am going to be joined by Walt, or Megan, and I'm going to be joined by Walt. We're going to bring this to life for you in a very real way. So like we said, the Q&A app is a way to have a focused, structured conversation with those rich Q&A features that's going to help people either ask questions in real time or enable your moderators to pre-screen those questions to make sure, like Colin was saying, that nothing's vulgar or inappropriate or even tangential that gets published. This is a great feature that you could think about for something like a town hall, where it's a large size, or a webinar or virtual classroom where there's multiple voices and great opportunities to ask questions. All right, so I'm going to spin this up, and I'm starting in my Microsoft Teams meetings. I'm going to just click here, and I'm going to create a meeting as usual. So I'm going to call this our project hybrid work strategy session. And this will be a way for me to meet with my team and talk about some of those kind of like return to the office type of, structures that we need to have in place, or what we need to do to reconnect as a team. And I'm going to add Nestor. I'm going to add Diego. I'm going to add, and Walt, did I get everybody that we need to have for our special team meeting?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, sounds good. So it feels like business as usual. So nothing I did to start out is different, right? You've created hundreds of team meetings. This is no different. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to join this event. Okay. So joining this event allows me to prepare some questions ahead of time. So what I'm going to show you next is how to add Q&A to your meeting. Now, I want to call out something because I can anticipate some questions coming up here. So I obviously scheduled a meeting with everybody that was internal to Contoso, my fake company. And you may be wondering, okay, Dominique, that's great, but what am I going to do if I have guests, or if I have people that are we call them federated users, which means it's kind of like a B2B type of connection where we work all the time with Accenture, so it's easy for us to connect. The reason why I'm outlining these scenarios is because I just want to highlight that anybody that's joining the meeting, whether it's a guest or a federated user, will have the same experience. Like it's not going to be different or clunky or, somehow diminished. It's going to be that one-to-one. So I'm planning this meeting. I'm so glad Nestor is here. He hopped on early. I love it. What I'm going to do is click on the apps, and I need to add that Q&A to the meeting. And you'll see I found it here recently. If you're following along, it's very simple to look for it. You can just start Googling or creating a query here to search for Q&A. And then I have my context window popping up. So I want to just take the minute, pump the brakes, and I want to call out some best practices here. So right now it says allow attendees to ask new questions. Yes. Respond to conversations. Great. So there's those two big buckets that we're going to play with the Q&A app, questions and conversations. The next one's very important. Moderate the attendee conversations. I'm going to choose for this conversation. Yes, I want to moderate it. I want to show you what that looks like. Now, when I click on yes, I want this to be moderated and I click on save, once I make that decision, it happens so quickly. I don't know if you saw it, but it says that cannot be turned off. Okay, so from this point on, as the meeting's going forward, that can't be turned off. Okay, so a few questions here and a few things to call out. One question that we get all the time is about the roles in the meeting, right? So I was in the meeting, I own this meeting, Nestor's my attendee, but as the meeting organizer, I'm the only one that can add that Q&A, and I'm the only one that could actually moderate. So yes, we can all participate, but only the organizer of the meeting can add the Q&A, and only the organizer can moderate those conversations. Okay, does that make sense? And Walt, please clarify if I misstepped anything or if you've seen anything different there.
Nope, you're right on the money. We actually did have that question come up earlier in terms of being able to assign the moderating, but thank you for giving that additional clarity where you're not able to go back and readjust that.
Hot topic, right? So Walt, you and I were preparing this and you had some really cool ideas about, streamlining the communication because this is all about adding structure. But all my listeners out there, I want you to watch my screen for a second. So we have the Q&A and we also have the chat. And I think we've been on meetings where you have different options and it may be unclear where you post what. Hello. Are we planning? So do I ask my questions here? Do I ask my questions there? It can kind of get a little bit redundant, right? So you want to be very clear, either like we did at the beginning today with housekeeping. But Walt, how do you manage this? Because I know this came up for you with your customers. What are some of your pro tips?
Right. So if you're looking into leveraging the Q&A app, and this will typically be used within a webinar series, something to keep, or webinar type of delivery, excuse me. Something to keep in mind is since it does give you multiple places to actually post that question, by which I mean the actual Q&A app, but also the chat section itself. One thing to strongly consider is actually turning off chat for the meeting before you go live, or when you do want to go and start guiding people towards the Q&A section. And we totally understand, and this is kind of, I guess, hypocritical for Dominique and myself for what we're showcasing here today, because we do have the chat open for this particular meeting. We also have the Q&A app up and running, but just for simplicity's sake and transparency, that's why we kept it open. But if you are going to be running an actual session where you want that Q&A app up and running, make sure you go into your meeting options once you have that actual event created, just so that way you can turn off the chat before you get started, and you're essentially making people go towards that Q&A app. They can post all of their questions there. They can also have discussion, so it's not limited to just having a question. They can get the conversation going with something that's going to be applicable to whatever the topic is, and then it's also giving you that added layer of moderation if you opted into it.
Yeah.
And then if you do decide after the fact that, hey, I want to be able to enable chat, that's always something you can re-enable afterwards on the fly anyways through the meeting options if you're the organizer.
That's
something to go in and keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's really important to call out because you can turn on or off chat. So if you did change your mind and you're like, okay, maybe more we'll get better conversations or different conversations in chat. You do have those options, but I like that. I think that's a great way to think through these tools, because sometimes when you have tools that slightly overlap, it could be confusing. But there's also goals in terms of what you're trying to accomplish with one versus another. So for Q&A, one of the things that we were imagining is creating this as a way to check in or make an announcement, start a discussion. What ideas work to the office? Say that. So I'm going to kick this off, and I went into my Q&A app, and you'll see that I chose from this drop down here. I have two options, discussion and question. So this is a discussion I'm starting. I could even format my text. So it's nothing too rich, but it gives me a chance to maybe have some bold headers or a list with different questions or different topics. And once I do that, I'm going to click on post. Okay, so you'll see that below I have in review, published, and dismissed. So because I'm the owner, right? I organize the meeting. When I create a conversation or discussion and a question, it goes immediately to published. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So when I kick it out there to all my listeners, it gives them a chance to see it and hopefully respond to it. And in this case, I want them to respond because I need to, get their input. Let's see. Right. Okay, and here's Miriam. So people could go in here and comment. Let's do two. And we could also show what we think about this. Yes, I think this is great. Edit the comment or delete it. So the other piece of this that we need to think about is, what else can you do with these conversations? So it's a pretty light lift, which I appreciate as an organizer. But one of the things I want to call out is that you can close the conversation. So when you close the conversation, the post and final comments are complete, right? So it's not necessarily something that's going to persist. Maybe this was a great way to kick off the discussion about returning to work, what ideas you have, and now we're going to talk about those ideas. So it doesn't continue to cascade as we're going. So I'm going to click continue. So now this is closed, and you'll see that that place where I could enter comments is no longer available. Megan Bowen just closed this conversation just now. The other thing that's really helpful is that if I wanted to ask a question here, how many days I'm going to post this? And in this case, what I'm going to do is pin this. So as the conversation's going on and we're having more of the end users submit questions here under review, the questions that are published, could potentially start to grow and grow, and you might lose the ones that you want to pay attention to or the conversations that you want to highlight. So that by that pinning mode allows you to highlight those conversations and make sure that they're staying front and center. So just to call this out, we chose the moderated view. The moderated view gives you these three options here under review, published, and dismissed. And that allows you as the organizer or the moderator to go in and to make choices about what you want to publish and then perhaps what you want to dismiss. If I was to just create a conversation, which I will show you in just a sec, where it's unmoderated, you may not have so many options. So I'm going to go on Tuesday. We're going to do another one. We'll call this return to office. Esther, Miriam, and I'm going to just send that right out there. Okay, so this is connecting just business as usual. I'm going to go into the apps here, add that Q&A. And in this case, I'm not going to choose the moderate attendee conversations and just click save. I just want to show you the one-to-one comparison here. So here, I don't have those other options, right? The in review, published, or dismissed. It's just asking a question, and it's kind of like this real-time feed. Okay, I want to just show you another thing here. So when I publish this, I still have the option to pin and close a conversation. So I do have some small moderation, but it's definitely not as interactive, or it gives us so many options like we did when we chose that moderated feature. Right. I just also want to get back here and show you one more thing. You'll notice that after you add the Q&A to that meeting, you'll see it at the top here. So when you open it up, let me just do that one more time because I did that pretty quickly. I went to the hybrid work strategy session. So I'm going to click there. And when I double click, I could see all of those components that are active in my meeting: the whiteboard, attendance, breakout rooms, and Q&A. So that's another place where you can go to see your Q&A, to review your published questions, and to see those questions that are dismissed. So if you wanted to go back in after a meeting and review that content, you could do that. And Walt, I'm going to wrap up right now by, anticipating the question that everybody has, which is, okay, this is a great way to capture information. This is a great way to have that interactive back and forth with my audience, but what happens to the data? So Q&A content is stored in Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, and it's accessed through eDiscovery. Okay, so this is something that's still in the works. And what we're hearing at Microsoft is that in the future, this will include like meeting highlights report and allow you to export some functionality for meeting organizers. But right now we don't have like an export button that allows you to capture all of that and to review that data. So that's going to need a little bit of eDiscovery and maybe a little bit of support if you don't have that access on your side. So Walt, before I stop presenting, anything come to mind in terms of what you've seen from Q&A? I know you had some cool use cases where you've seen people use this as a way to do check-ins for audience, warm up questions, great ways to kind of see who's participating. But before we wrap, anything you want to call out?
Sure. And actually, I think it flows quite nicely from your point in terms of still being in development because it is a newer application. We did have a question come through or a couple comments, and it looks like we have good discussion going on it too in terms
Awesome.
of being able to ask questions anonymously. So
Yeah,
currently, it is. As of right now, it's not a feature within the Q&A app. With that being said, yeah, we are always taking feedback 100%. It is still being built upon. I do believe that feature is being worked on, if I'm not misunderstanding on that one, but they're trying to add as many new features to it as possible. But that did also bring up a really good point around making questions anonymous. Is this a great culture piece? Is that the right thing to go ahead and do? Yes or no? And there's certainly multiple approaches to that discussion. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it an argument, but an actual discussion behind it. Because, yeah, you're always going to get some pretty snarky questions, to say the least. It does happen, regardless of what type of content you're discussing. Was a training session, town hall type session? It does happen. And just being able to ask a question honestly or black out the chat, yeah, it may not necessarily be the right way to go, but it is a feature that's still available in some capacity based off what's appropriate for the group. So I think that's an important call out right there. And then I did also want to point out, just kind of going back to the best practice piece, when it comes down to, say, engagement, if you're the meeting organizer, you do have access to the actual attendee tab within the meeting details portion. If you did initiate the Q&A app and people have been active within it, they're asking questions, posting discussions, that information does reflect in the attendee detail.
Oh, that's right. Yep, that's right. Let me see if that's available in those team meetings we were just running.
Sure. Yeah, it might be, I think, because it was still up and running, so it might not. Yeah, it might need a little bit of time, but it will add an additional column in that attendee detail area if, hey, did this person ask a question, yes or no, or was it a discussion? So that's an additional thing to keep in mind if you're trying to identify, did people actually engage with you in some capacity. So that way you don't have to
Yeah.
filter through the chat section. You can just look for a dedicated Q&A column at that point. So I think it's an additional great thing to point out.
Yeah, and Walt, I think you're absolutely right, because I know sometimes when we do our trainings at Microsoft, that's a way you have to participate, right? Like, how do you get credit? So that's a great way to get that credit. And the other one is by asking questions. So I don't think I made it very clear, because with the sandbox, I kind of ran into some issues highlighting this. But yes, your audience can totally use the Q&A to ask questions. It's not just like a one-way conversation where your presenter pushes it. Because even on our side, I could see the questions and comments under review here. But yes, you can ask a question, and when they're moderated, the moderator, like myself, will have to go in, and this is what I did not do. But we can go in here and I could publish those questions. So you could see now, Liz just had a question that I just pushed through. How does this work on a recorded meeting? Great question. That's actually a fabulous question. But I just published that through. When the questions are not moderated, they just are free flowing, and then they could just appear without someone approving them. But that's a great question about the recording. So how does a Q&A show up with recording? I haven't seen anything about that.
I believe it will just simply live in the actual Q&A app itself. It does not necessarily show up on the recording.
Okay, that's
like
a
it
good
would
point.
with say a live event.
Yeah. Okay, I gotcha.
Great
Hey,
question,
everybody. This has been a really awesome conversation. I'm going to put a bunch of resources in the chat right now. I know we have to wrap. We only have these short little snackables to share with you. And if you have questions, you want to stick around, Walt and I will hang on. We can answer some questions, run through some demos if you want to see more. And also, I just want to call out that on Monday the 16th, which is next week, we are going to be discussing breakout rooms. So if you have any questions or use cases or anything you want to see about breakout rooms, that is the place to go. So we can kind of run through some more content there. And Walt, if I could, just one more shout out, one more shameless promotion. We are also doing a return to office showcase, and that's coming up on the 18th and 19th of next week. I'll put those dates in the chat again. And that is going to be a way to run through some apps to help you and your team get back in action in the office if that is on your roadmap. And we are going to run through Team Link, which is one of my favorite apps, and we're going to run through Company Communicator, and this new app called Company Ideas. So you'll see some really funky stuff there. If you're not familiar with these apps, come check it out. And everybody, thanks for sticking with us. I know we are at the end of our slot. Please, if you have questions, hang and we will answer those questions.